othering, or the concept of making someone feel other than. We've all had experiences in our lives where we knew we didn't belong, where someone made a joke, looked past us, or simply said, "You don't belong." Just as Mark shared in his reflection about his friend challenging his speech. And just like Mark, we have each found those communities, those places where we do belong, where we could be our full selves and celebrate the differences we each brought. And I'm sure we've also been the ones that have made others not feel belonged. John A. Powell, the director of the Othering and Belonging Institute, as well as the professor of law, African American studies, and ethnic studies at UC Berkeley, writes in his book, The Power of Bridging, the following. In psychologist Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, belonging is listed as humans' third most important need. Belonging for Maslow entailed love and connections to others. Powell continues, later scholars of Maslow's work have reordered the hierarchy and placed the need to belong as the first and most primal need, reasoning that one cannot secure food or safety unless one belongs. Powell then asks, if Maslow's hierarchy is right and one of our most basic needs is to belong, then why are we so quick to other and engage in breaking relationship? His answer? We other to belong. And we see this. We see this in those narratives and those battles of us versus them. The wars being fought between Palestine and Israel, Russia and Ukraine. We see this in the calling out and the shaming in our own society. We see this in the stories about immigrants and the justification of their deportations. We see this in the silencing of challenging voices. We see this in the continuous and ongoing onslaught of stories of how people are different, of how their differences make us unsafe, of how we need to protect ourselves. We see this in the defining of gender and identity, race and ethnicity. In fact, we see this need to make others separate from us permeating everything that we do right now. I don't know about you, but it feels kind of like an uphill battle to try to see beyond all this constant othering. There's some that would go as far to say that othering is natural to who we are as humans. It's how we have survived for as long as we have, by that tribal nature of trying to belong. Powell suggests differently and offers a different way of thinking about it. If we are to advance belonging, we must stop assuming, or at least mount a serious challenge to the idea of othering being natural or inevitable. While we may not be able to make sense of a world without categories, there is still a great number of possibilities. Powell continues, the book Making All the Difference, written by Martha Minow, suggests there's no natural meaning to difference. One might even say there are no natural differences. Differences are made by the meaning society gives to difference. And that is at the root of the problem when we try to build belonging. We are pushing against all of those ways we, as humans, have crafted meaning out of our differences among us. Those differences that we have created to fuel our stories about who belongs. And we've witnessed this. We've witnessed this in our own history of Unitarian Universalism, when William Ellery Channing defined Unitarian Christianity. There was a Christianity that was beyond us and with us. We saw this when Curtis Reese and John Dietrich defined humanism. That made our circles even smaller. And we saw this in 2017 when the UU Commission on Institutional Change invited us to widen our circle of concern. We have closed and opened our circles as UUs constantly through our history. As a community of people who are continually striving to understand who we are and what it means to us and how that defines us, we're not alone in creating differences in order to belong. However, we have something at the core of who we are as Unitarian Universalists that allow us to open those a little bit more, because we have the idea of constant revelation, constant understanding that we can learn more. We don't believe that once we've created a meaning or an understanding, that it is static. We know we have further challenges to lean into new understandings and learnings. I recently had the opportunity to lean into a new understanding of being in relationships, specifically about calling people out. I read Loretta Ross's book, Calling In: How to Start Making Change with Those You'd Rather Cancel. Loretta Ross is an associate professor at Smith College and co-founder of the National Center of Human Rights and the sister song Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. She received the 2022 MacArthur Fellowship and in 2024 was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. So Ross first focuses on this call-out culture. We all know about being canceled, right? Who doesn't know about being canceled? Okay. And there's a fear of that right now, right? Am I going to be canceled because I say something or I post something or I do something? Heavens. Some of our stars, some of our people in our areas of understanding are being canceled. So doesn't that make it fearful for us? So she states, a public call-out have been long employed by activists and dissidents well before the call-out was ever coined. Our concentrated fury is one of the few means held by the powerless to bring the powerful to account, which explains why so many activists today perceive it as the most powerful tool they have, especially as a way to drawing dramatic attention to urgent priorities. We wield the handful of tools that money can't buy or break: our voice, our experience, our courage, our resolve, our anger. Ross continues, the lesson I eventually learned was that call-outs might have their place and purpose, but they can also be distracting, even destructive. Calling out is an easy muscle to flex, but as I've learned, it's a limited tool, one that's a poor fit for a lot of jobs. Calling out can be an interesting way to expend a whole lot of anguish to achieve very little. She doesn't dismiss call-outs completely. She suggests that there are definite places where the tool is needed and critical, like when serious harms or wrongs have been committed, when confronting major power disparity, when other means of recourse have failed or inaccessible, when it prevents future harms being occurring, when it will encourage others who have been harmed to come forward, when the individual or institution has a pattern of failing to address its wrongs, and when trust and good faith have already been exhausted. And we have histories. We have a history of call-outs. When Martin Luther could no longer stomach the excesses of the Renaissance Catholic Church, he posted his 95 Theses. When American colonists lost faith in the English monarchy, they challenged King George with the Declaration of Independence. When Frederick Douglass escaped slavery, he made it his mission to publicly highlight the cruelty and hypocrisy of the peculiar institution. And in most recent years, with the many accusers who found a common voice in the hashtag #MeToo movement or the participants in the Black Lives Matter movements. Those are when they have been critical and needed. Ross also says that she has learned that call-outs have 3 critical ways when they can be more destructive than constructive. When calling out becomes more of exerting ego or power rather than serving that larger purpose. When the harm of the call out outweighs the harm of the original wrong. And when call outs, like what we're witnessing now, create a stifled, fearful environment where people are reluctant to engage or get involved. Ross suggests that using the tool of calling people in is a call in that is a call out done with love. And she also suggests it's strategic. She says, some people may be skeptical about calling in. They may think it's passive niceness, a lesson in turning the other cheek, when it's really an organizing practice and a way of life. Calling in is not practicing respectability politics by insisting on civility at the expense of justice. It's not about making minor adjustments to our etiquette so that privileged people feel better about themselves without changing the structures and systems of oppression. It's not inauthentically presenting yourself to seem less of a threat. It's not about making people feel comfortable in their complicity in human rights violations. Most of all, calling in is not about giving people a pass on accountability. She concludes with this: we don't have to appreciate the strategic use of anger without giving in to meanness or disrespect. We don't have to suppress our righteous anger and ignore the harm we experience. Call-outs can work when you know someone will never become an ally. But if there is a potential to start or deepen a relationship, to create an ally, give calling in a try instead. So this brings us back to the work of building belonging, which depends on us to understand when there is that potential to deepen relationship, to create an ally. If you listen to episode 2 of UUSF's Pod and Country, then you may have already heard me tell a little bit of this story. However, I think this story is a good example of how we can call people into relationship, especially when we are afraid. I served a congregation, Cascade Unitarian Fellowship, in Wenatchee, Washington for 9 years. And during that time, I had to deal with a lot of exposure to guns. We lived near a gun range, and I heard the constant sound of guns firing. When I participated in marches on the other side of the street from where we were marching, there would be people standing and holding their guns. There was an older couple in the congregation who it deemed were involved in a murder-suicide when they took their own lives with a gun. And all of this along the side, the continued increase of school shootings, with my children participating regularly in active shooter drills. I think to say that I was afraid is to actually minimize my actual terror at the time. I want to be clear, I'm not afraid of guns. In fact, I've had an opportunity in a safe and controlled environment to actually fire guns. Guns were in my household. My father was a police officer and a deputy sheriff. I knew that they could be in an environment and be safely stored as well as respected. So it wasn't the guns themselves that I was afraid of. It was the people who owned them that were the unknown and who scared me. I was frustrated and terrified that we as a country could, and I want to say, and still cannot, come up with a way to ensure gun ownership was as responsible and centered on safety. I could have and was even encouraged to join the Moms Against Gun Violence movement. However, in the back of my mind, I knew that would only be adding fuel to my fear and not alleviating it. Instead, I decided to call people into relationship. I didn't know then I was actually practicing what Ross wrote about. I decided to reach out to gun owners, to have a conversation, to understand and be curious. I wanted to learn why people owned guns, what they understood about safety, and what they thought they could do, or we could do, about the escalation of gun violence. I talked with members in the congregation who would not have come forward before who actually owned guns. I talked with a lifelong member of the National Rifle Association. I talked to one of the members of the local militia groups, which we had many up in Washington State. These conversations led to a deeper relationship with my congregants, to a gun safety class in our congregation, to working together on other issues we agreed on in the community. Did it mean we agreed on everything? Absolutely not. But it did grow relationships. It did grow allies. It's this building of belonging in the midst of differences where Ross and Powell say we have the potential to become bridges in our communities instead of destroyers. Ross talks about our spheres of influence and that we cannot expect 100% agreement in our community. She actually says it would be boring if we actually expected 100% agreement. Who wants to be in a community that agrees 100%? Where would we even get the chance to dive into that idea of constant revelation if we were all in agreement? And yet, when we use call-out techniques in communities where we only have 90%, 75%, or even 50% agreement, we risk losing potential allies in our work. Ross states, in focusing on our opponents, we often neglect those who are closer to us in political perspective. These are the people who we have a real hope of calling in. Our task is to figure out who are the 75% and 50% in our lives, instead of leaving these potential allies standing on the sidelines, vulnerable to recruitment by those who oppose us. We should actually prioritize paying attention to them. We should not sacrifice them to the hubris of the call-out culture and purity politics. So we must stop seeing them as problems to be solved, but as potential allies we can figure out how to work with. Ross continues, this requires learning not to pressure people into agreeing with us, but learning how to persuade others into being with us, keeping a seat at the table and agreeing, this is hard, and agreeing not to walk away when we disagree. For us at UUSF, this means within our walls and outside our walls. If we are to meet whatever is coming at us, whatever might possibly happen in our world, we're going to have to lean into those relationships. We're going to have to give each other grace. We're going to have to remember each other's humanity. We need to lean into the nuance of complex issues and relationships. Think about who are your 90%? Who are your 75%? Who are your 50% that you could lean into relationship with? Let us be leaders in trying to build those bridges of relationship and belonging. Let us lean into curiosity and tap into the idea of constant revelation when we encounter others. Let us be strategic and not be fueled by our anger. Maybe we could even add a little tassel or an apron to signify when we are each having a bad day, so we can be a little more gracious, remind ourselves of the humanity of each other. Or even just remember the line from the choir anthem today. Although I am but a fragile singularity, a simple brushstroke upon the canvas of creation, I have a head full of ideas and a heart full of love, like you. Audre Lorde said, "It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." Let us be a community that's not boring, but one that builds belonging by celebrating we have different ideas, beliefs, passions to discuss, and others eager to discuss them with us. Let us seek out allies in our larger community and find ways to build a stronger movement of resistance. May it be so. Amen.